This podcast is brought to you by Hoare Chartered Accountants. Hoare Chartered Accountants are based in Galway City and are a leading provider of audit, accountancy and taxation services.
Now you're welcome
For more
along
information,
to the Maroon and White
visit
pod. So last week obviously we had a
horecharteredaccountant.ie.
reaction pod to the Galway Meath game, and unfortunately that just didn't go Galway's way, and the season didn't go the way they wanted. So we're going to review the year in full of their season, of the Galway senior footballer season, obviously there, and then over the next few weeks we're going to have interviews building up to the club championship. The power rankings will be back, and the club championship obviously getting underway the first week in August. So a lot to look forward to there still for Galway supporters. I'm joined by former St James's manager Barry Downey to look back on Galway season. Barry, it's a sort of tough time when we're talking here. You're kind of looking at semi-finals at the weekend, and you're seeing Kerry Tyrone, Donegal and Meath. Like, this was us as Galway fans last year, obviously, when we played Donegal in the semi-final.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the success, I suppose, is the fact that you kind of almost took it for granted. We were planning our weekends, including this one, to travel to Dublin and what we'd do and who we'd stay with and what we'd try and get in. But again, I suppose that's just a measure of where Galway football is at the moment. You're obviously disappointed not to be part of this weekend. So I think, as I said, from a fan point of view, it's disappointing, but it's nice to be, demanding and disappointed with that.
Yeah, it definitely, it's still going to take a few weeks to get over when you consider how close we were last year. We were looking to push on. And as you say, everyone, not that there was a cockiness, but there was probably an expectation to probably be the word this year.
There was, and I think as certainly as the championship progressed, we were lucky enough to be over in New York for the start, and you know, every game there just seemed to be and I suppose the big word this year, particularly with the new rules, is momentum. But every game they played had huge momentum shifts, including that game against Meath. And you remember up in Derry, there was a huge momentum shift in the last. Down was the same, Armagh was the same, and you just felt that their name was on the cup. That used to be a saying years ago for, I remember, the FA Cup. But you say, God, their name is on the cup because they seem to be coming through these games and winning them, which I know Pádraig alluded to. It does show great character. Obviously, you don't want to be relying on last minute or final wins. But I suppose that's the part that people started to believe as well when these games were being turned around and won. This was the year kind of thing.
Good point to make there. There was a lot of games throughout the year where the narrative was that Galway are just finding a way. Like, if you look at games like Mayo in the Connacht final, found a way. Up in Derry, probably got out of jail, but found a way. Same against Armagh, same against Downey. You just felt that Galway were answering the questions.
And look, even as I said against Meath, and were they 6 points down at one stage to turn it around to 3 up with 8 or 9 minutes to go? You said, "Oh, this is it now." They've taken the throttle again, and that is a sign of a great team. And look, as I said, you lose a game by a point, and they're the thin lines, and sometimes I'd rather lose a game by 7 or 8 points than a point, because it hurts more. And it's the what ifs, and if this decision didn't happen, and this decision. But look, as I said, overall, I think it's a good place to be in. They're certainly there or thereabouts. I know that's not what you want to be, but I liken it, Paul, to remember the Dubs in the early 90s. They had the famous 4-game saga against Meath. The following year, they lost in All Ireland to Donegal. The following year, they lost the semi-final to Derry. 94 was a final they lost against Down. And then the year they probably shouldn't have won, it was 95 against Tyrone. And I suppose I see a lot of similarities between both teams. It was quality. They definitely, again, were good enough to win in All Ireland, which they eventually did. So I don't think Galway are too far away, to be fair.
You mentioned Galway not being too far away there, but like, overall for you, Barry, how would you dissect the season?
Yeah, I suppose you'd have to go back to the league as well. They started so well, and I suppose that tapered off disappointingly. I do think the game in Croke Park was a big turning point as well. they had chances early on to again get that momentum and probably dictate that game, which didn't happen. And then, as I said, unfortunately, the crazy day that the final day was, I know they played Kerry, but you had Mayo, who were minutes away from relegation, were in a league final. And I think it would have been so important for this Galway group to get to that league final. And, not having won a league since 81, I think it would have been a really good marker to lay out and give lads great confidence. But of course, which is unfair, I think, to any team competing. I think there was always that kind of view on the first round of the championship, even though it was in New York, it was still, the following week. So how much did you really want to get to a league final? But I suppose overall, as I said, I think there was a lot more expectation this year, which is what, as I said earlier, is what the probably real disappointment was.
Same time, the Connacht titles and the success we have in Connacht, like they can be sniffed at, because we all have to remember the times as well where we struggled in Connacht big time.
Absolutely, and it's not too long ago. You remember Aidan O'Shea showing the 5 fingers; they just won 5 in a row. And again, Galway would have given their right hand to get one. And I suppose that's the one thing, in fairness to Pádraig and his management team have brought now is the fact that they're not happy with 4 in a row. We want more, and supporters want more. But I see it even from my young lads' point of view. And as again, this is the measure that whether this team, and please God, they do go on and win something, but they've created a huge legacy for Galway football, and being involved with the 14s as well the last number of years. You can't measure that. And that's something that, again, I know from my time growing up as a Dub as well. Dublin didn't win every year, but they were contesting, and the excitement around games, and even ourselves going to Croke Park this year, or going to New York, or going to McHale Park. It's that excitement that it builds in young lads, and you're fostering that, and ultimately everybody wants to win. But that's a nice legacy to have, and an important one to have for the future players of Galway.
Do you think, looking back at it overall, I've said this chatting to a few people, that we didn't get a result that day in Pearse Stadium against Dublin? When you look back at it now, it probably is a killer in one sense.
Yeah, and again, they wrestled it back brilliantly. Just after the break, there was, I think Matthew Thompson rattled the goal, and then there was a point, and then there was a fortuitous goal. But again, they'd wrestled it back, and they probably deserved a draw. I know people coming out that day said, "Oh, Dublin were by far better," but there was only 1 point in it at the end. And look, the group of death proved to be the group of death, because all 4 teams are now out of the championship. But yeah, it probably could have. But no, I go back to what I was saying. I think they showed great resolve. If I'm being critical, the only thing I would probably have said is that they were probably, I would like to have seen them being a little bit quicker in transition from back to front. And, Galway, for me, were always that type of swashbuckling, footballing team that, again, would play that 30, 40-yard pass from the back and turn teams on the back foot. And that the new rules would, really do suit that, and particularly with the forwards Galway have. And I think that was something that Meath particularly did to them in the final, or in the quarter final. And, it was very Galway-like is what Meath were doing, to be fair.
When you look back at that group of death, do you think there was nearly consequences in it from being in that group? When you look, all 4 teams didn't make it to semi. Now it's obviously an easy thing to say now, but
yeah, look, I think it does play a factor. I know, in fairness to Pádraig and Galway, wouldn't probably use that as an excuse, nor Armagh or Dublin. But I do think it has to, because no disrespect, but you look at the likes of Kerry, who faced, no disrespect again, but to Cavan, they played Cavan as their quarter final, um, or sorry, the last game out of it. And it does have an effect particularly when you're playing week on, week off, week on, week off, and you've played, I think they played 8 games in total up to the Meath game. It has to have an effect, and particularly mind and bodies. And that's the thing too. I don't think Galway probably had the team they wanted out for any of those games. If they had everybody they wanted on the field at the one time, I think again that would have been a huge factor for them as well. But yeah, I don't think they'd use it as an excuse, but it's definitely a factor.
Yeah, you even nearly look at it from the Armagh to the Down game, those two games. Like, in fairness, Galway did go to the well on both of those occasions, is another thing you have to say.
Absolutely, and like the you know the sense of achievement the first day, and the excitement of winning a tight game like that, and then to come down and then face into a game like Down was always going to be a struggle. Um, and we saw Down the previous week against Monaghan. Were very unlucky not to come out of that game. So it was always going to be a difficult one. And again, I keep saying they met the challenge, and yeah, they conceded a big score, but they scored a big score, and they pulled it out when most people would probably not expected them to have done it. And again, the subs that came in all did the job. I think the 3 or 4 subs they brought in that evening all scored. So from a management point of view, that's all you can ask for, is that when you go to the reserve, or the finishers as they call them now, they all contributed. I suppose going back to, I think one game that really stood out for me too was probably the best performance was probably Roscommon. And again, that's where people started to get a little bit of belief as well. Now, how good Roscommon were on the day, I don't know. But in fairness to Galway, you can only beat what's in front of you. And I thought that was really, really convincing display that day. And that was where I started to get excited.
Yeah, just a couple of questions that came in from listeners. We'll start with a few of them, Barry, before we go back into it. Just from Matt Maloney. Is player welfare a load of crap for the GA? Whoever agreed to making team or players play 3 weekends in a row is just wrong. There has to be a fair system. Obviously, just 3 weekends in a row, it's fairly demanding, but if you top your group, you obviously get to 2 games in 3 weeks. What do you think of this 3 weeks on the trot?
Yeah, I think again it needs to be looked at, and I know, in fairness to Jarlath Burns, I know the calendar for next year I know is changing, but I know for 27 they're looking at pushing it out till the third week in August to have the final. But I think with the new rules as well, I know through the league, a lot of teams were finding it very difficult to get bodies on the field. Through hamstrings, and again, I haven't seen the stats, but I know there's a lot more running around that middle eight. And again, for amateur sports people, and again for the demands that they have, and particularly the travelling, I know it was mentioned in some counties, but it is a factor again. And again, the recovery that these guys have to go through to compete at that level week in, week out. But yeah, I don't think it's actually looked at properly.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's a contentious one to talk about, but yeah, if something has to be done, maybe with that 3 weekends in a row. Just another one then. Why did it seem like we were stuck in limbo between the old system or the rules or the new rules? And against Meath, we tried to control the tempo of the game, but when we threw off the shackles, we did well. Was it a case of managing players' loads, or what was the issue? That was from Flat Footballer. It's probably the point you kind of touch on there, that you didn't see enough of Galway. I suppose just going direct when we did turn that 6 points, uh, when we were 6 points behind when we turned that around.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Down game. I thought that was a game where they really had a good rattle, and again they had to go for it. But yeah, it probably is a little bit of a hangover from the old rules. But given the personnel that Galway have, when the new rules came in, again, I had my favourites marked out early on as Galway and Donegal, purely because of again the personnel they had to match these new rules. And like everybody says, it suits top forwards, which Galway have. I suppose from a defensive point of view, takes a bit of getting used to, because teams now have to defend 1-on-1. And I've seen that even at club level now, it's different than having 13, 14, 15 bodies behind the ball. But yeah, I think if they were a little bit more, I suppose, I won't say daring, but a little bit quicker in that transition, I think it would have really suited. And as I said, Mead particularly did it, and that's something that I would have always seen Galway football as as doing really well over the years.
Does it still come back, Barry? We're nearly saying this for the last year or two now, but does this still come back to not having Damien Comer and Shane Walsh fit at the same time?
No, I don't think it does, and I think it's disrespectful to the other boys that are there. You know, you look this year, I think it was Matthew Tierney, um, Rob Finnerty, and Shane were the three top scorers. Now I know if Damien was fit, he'd probably be in there, but I think like they scored an average of 26 points per game. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And I suppose the part of the thing was, you know, did Rob and the Tierney chap, did they perform in Croke Park? Maybe if they haven't done the last couple of times. But yeah, look, obviously Shane and Damien are great talents, and everybody'd love to get onto most county teams. But I think it's disrespectful for the lads they have there. I thought that, you know, Matthew Thompson again, he's going to be a serious asset. And yeah, I don't think it was down to that. I don't think it was down to. I think it's unfair to the other lads that were there, to say that it was purely down to that. But you know, you do want to have your strongest team out, and look, the two lads are serious talents.
It's just so frustrating though for Damien himself and Galway supporters when you see what he does against Meath in such a short space of time that we just couldn't get him more. And we even seen him in that league game against Dublin. Like he's just a player who's made for these new rules as well.
Look, and that's the thing, and as you said, it's very frustrating for the lad himself. And in fairness to him, he's you know, his mental capacity must be off the charts to be able to withstand the knockbacks and still come back. And like that, it's not only what he does himself on the ball, but it's the attention that he draws. And I think that's where the other lads could even benefit even more, because I know if you know, we've met him a couple of times at club level, you're not just looking at what he can do, but it's who's going to mind him, and if you do, we'll double up on him. But then there's somebody else free or loose, and at county level, that's even greater. I remember seeing him last year against Donegal, and you know, the movement off the ball, and you know, he occupied two, if not three, Donegal lads at one time. And again, that frees up an opportunity for somebody else. So yeah, it's hugely frustrating, both for a supporter, for the team, but more importantly for the lad himself.
Yeah, and I know sometimes Shane can receive harsh criticism within this county, but I thought personally, like if you look at some of his moments, what he did against Down when he was only on the first half was incredible. Armagh, you can even see when he kicks that free and the players around him. And maybe he was quite at stages for me, but I'm still so impressed that he was the player that was going to take on the 2-pointer to, I suppose, get Galway back into that game too. But I thought overall for the games he played, it was a really good season for him.
No, without a doubt, and it was great to see him and prove a lot of people question him wrong as well. And even the last free that he got against, was it Downey, had the injured shoulder, you know, and I think he stayed on the field just to take that free, and then he came off directly after it. But you know, he gives everything, and again, he's the one of the few players that I'd actually pay in to watch play Gaelic football.
Mm.
And you know, I remember the display he gave as well in the league. I think it was against Donegal. It was a very
Yeah.
windy day, or a game that was dictated by the wind. But again, some of the scores he got, and particularly one against the wind, where he just drilled the ball, you know, at a level of about maybe 20 feet, it just drifted over the bar. You know, stuff like that is exceptional. People just take it for granted sometimes. Um, but yeah, that's what happens, I suppose, and I think he's got big enough shoulders to carry it.
I don't know if you're listening to last week's podcast, Barry, but when we were chatting with Stephen O'Mara and Alan Flynn, the big thing we were saying was it's just so important to keep all the squad group together. Like now's not the time where they need people to leave squads or thing, because the squad is here at the minute, and it's like the likes of Shane, Damien, Johnny Heaney, Paul Conroy. These players are crucial for Galway.
Oh no, look, and I touched on it earlier, but the Dubs in that early 90s, that group, and you know, I see a lot of similarities with this Galway team and the management team as well. I don't think it's a case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Look, you need a bit of luck along the way as well. They could have won that game against Meath by a point, and we'd be shouting them on this weekend and expecting an All Ireland and to win it. So it's those fine lines sometimes. And I don't think I would much rather be in a Galway camp at the moment than a Dublin or a Cork or Armagh even, because I think they are a very tight knit group. They are very driven. Pádraig himself obviously is very driven. So I wouldn't like to see anybody drift away from the panel or the management team.
Just a question that came in from Gareth McCann, another listener. Do you think if PJ does stay out his final year, to tempt all the players to stay on for another season?
I think you have to, yeah. I think, as I said, it's that kind of I won't say siege mentality now, but I just think that they know how close they are. I know that doesn't guarantee you anything either, but there's a kind of an omerta amongst them as well that, it's all for one and one for all. So, and I think maybe an injection of maybe one or two, but I don't think there's anybody actually missing. Hopefully, maybe somebody might put their hand up in this year's club championship, just to put things in the mix. And I know there's one or two lads there that were brought into the panel who we haven't seen much of. And all that will stand to them. And I think that's a great bit of foresight from the management team to bring and include these guys and have them around the place for the likes of next year and the year after. I think it's a big investment, and it shows a great confidence in these young lads that are coming in, so that when they do make the step up, it's not a big deal for them.
Yeah, it's a good point from Garage again. Like, whereas new management might make players decide to step away and the new year begin, and it is a good point if someone was to come in and say PJ and the lads didn't commit to next year. But the thing about it is, when people say don't commit to next year, it's about the energy, really, isn't it? Do you have the energy to go again? Because 6 years now they've done what Galway. This would be number 7 next year. Like, it's all about, do we have the energy, and do we have what it takes to go again?
Yeah, and look, the demands are greater, and you've touched on it there. The abuse that some of these guys get, even from within the county, the commitment levels that are there, even club level now is akin to maybe county level 5 or 10 years ago with the commitments that are required, and I think the fun has gone out of it. I'm being honest. It's just that I suppose the desire that group have and the belief they have in themselves. Whether they stay on or, yeah, I would like to see them. I don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't. I don't think, as I said, there's anything there that's too serious that can't be fixed or tweaked. I think they'll learn a lot from the 2 defeats I think they had in the 8 games. So I think, and both of them were by a point. So I don't think there's a huge surgery to be made. And I know, I suppose the scene has got a lot more competitive with the new rules. There's probably 5 or 6 teams now that feel they can win it every year, where we only had 2 or 3 previously. But I do think another year with the new rules should stand to Galway. But as you say, it's whether the management and the players, I suppose, have that desire to go on. But I don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't.
Just there, you mentioned that you expect PJ and the lads to go again for another year in 2026. Would you like to see them add anyone else to the management team, or do you think it'll be very much stay as they are?
No, I think it stay as they are. Again, everybody has their opinions, and I've heard so many different uh, views, shall we say, on it and on the management team. For me, as I said, I don't think there's any great reason. I think, in fairness, you have is it Mikey Graham or Mickey Graham?
Mickey Graham, yeah.
Yeah, he's only in his first year. Same with Mr. Morris. So again, they'll learn an awful lot from this year. In fairness to Pádraig, he was dropped a bombshell at the start of the year when Cian O'Neill left. I don't think that was any great disappointment. But he went and he freshened it up by 2. And again, I think you've got to give those guys a bit of time, particularly with the new rules, because in fairness, the rules changed through the league into championship. I know that was the same for everybody, but no, I don't think there's any need to panic too much on that front. And I think, in fairness, the most important people that need to believe that they have the right management team is the players, and I think they do.
You mentioned about the management team staying. Obviously, Paul Conroy, you've worked with him at club level. He made the big decision last year to come back and give it another year. Could you see him maybe extending that out to another year?
Yeah, look, I'd love to. I'm a huge fan of Paul. Obviously, as I said, having a couple of years with him was great, and I learned an awful lot from him. I think there is a place for him. Whether that's maybe closer to goal, or whether that's maybe using him sparingly. Again, I don't think there's any great need to see him out through a league campaign again. And, we see how Dublin have managed with Stephen Cluxton, and Stephen appears around the middle of April, early May. And I think Paul would benefit from the same type of thing. And I think it's important to have him around as a leader. But just again, he has that desire, and it would be an awful shame should Galway, please God, go on and win in All Ireland next year, not to have him as part of the group, having served for so long. And I know that it has to come to an end at some stage, but I just believe that, as I said, there's definitely something in this group, and I think he's good enough to play a part. And from what I know of him, he's very driven, but he won't just be there for the sake of being there. And in fairness to him, he's put his body through the rigor more than a number of times. But I do think he's certainly worth keeping and worth having as part of the group and playing a part.
Yeah, I still think he's absolutely crucial. It would be fantastic to see him back for another year. If you look at it, Barry, who was your player of the season this year for Galway?
Great question. I thought Rob Finnerty showed up a good lot. I thought he stood up a good bit. I thought Keane Darcy, for me, surprised me. Again, I wouldn't have been a huge fan. The one that I suppose stands out the most, though, is Matthew Thompson.
Yeah.
I just thought when needed, he's exciting. And for me, he was probably the one that probably stood out the most, along with Shane, because as you said, when it came to the clutch moments, Shane was the man who again delivered, and again stood up when people were questioning him. But just purely for as I said, I remember the game in Salt Hill against Dublin, and particularly his display as well against Down. I thought he was really, really exciting, and one that I really looking forward to seeing now at club level in the club championship.
Yeah, no, there were some big performers there. In fairness, if you're looking at as we mentioned, like we were learning as the new rules went along, and that's nearly with every intercounty team. They're still learning, but a good bit did change from the way Galway set up last year, where we had Liam Silk, Dylan McHugh tuck it in, and we had a real kind of defensive structure. But that's nearly thrown out the window now with these new rules. So there there was a big change, and maybe that did take a bit of adjusting to as the season went on.
I did, and look, you could be very critical of lads, but as I said, that one-on-one defending now is become really big, and when you come up against the likes of Jordan Morris and these guys, they are going to be very challenging, and no more than Rob Finnerty or Matthew Thompson on the other side. So I think the year, a lot of lads have learned an awful lot from this year from a defensive point of view. And players like you mentioned that would have, you'd put your house on in previous years. Um, you know, Without mentioning any names, I do think they would have taken an awful lot from this year. And again, looking at that one-on-one defending. So that's what I was saying. I don't think the Keane O'Neill thing was such a big, thing when you consider the way the game has evolved. He was obviously excellent at setting up defensively. But now that we've gone with like Kerry, I know he's there now, but they're not exactly fantastic at the back at the minute either. So I do think that they will learn an awful lot from this year.
The goalkeeper, Barry, there was competition there between Conor Flaherty and Conor Gleeson, but we didn't have a consistent number one for the championship. Is safe enough to say. Do you see that as an issue?
It probably is. At the same time, if you look at any other position on the field, you'd make those changes every week, whether it's a midfielder, whether it's a forward. Some would argue, why don't you have the same competition as a goalkeeper? But at the same time, a goalkeeper is such a pivotal position now, particularly with the new rules as well. And confidence is a big part of a goalkeeper. That is something that probably does need a little bit of looking at. And I think, again, if the management team review the year, again, you can only base it on game performance, but it would be important to have a consistent goalkeeper there. I think, particularly for, again, I think it helps the whole dynamic of a back 6 or 8. And again, I think the responsibility too, when you look at, people talk about percentage kickouts and things like that, it always comes back to the goalkeeper. I think the responsibility has to lie on the lads out the field as well. Goalkeepers can only put the ball where they're asked to put it. With the new rules now, that becomes 50-50. And, if you look again at the Meath game, did Galway get 50-50? Probably not.
Yeah, I think it'll be a big one now for them to really get a consistent number one for 2026, isn't it?
Yeah, I think now, in fairness, I think the two guys are certainly, I don't think there's anybody else in Galway that they're overlooking. But it's definitely something now that I think the two guys, and if they are the two to go for it now, let's have a proper competition and give both of them equal time to stake a place for championship again. See what the priority is for league and stuff like that. But as I said, I think it's important that they do get a bit of consistency there for the lads themselves as well.
Just on this, Barry, a lot of people asking new faces we can expect to see. We will get into some new faces, but the one thing I would say when you look at this squad overall, a lot of the players who are there are the best players in the county.
Yeah, you'd have to say so. Again, I'm looking forward to seeing this year's club championship as a neutral now. This year, I can go to games and observe it fairly neutrally. From what I saw the last couple of years, I don't think there was anybody kind of left out. I'm excited to see some of the Dunmore lads. We're seeing a lot of them at under 20 level, and I know there's potentially one or two good lads there. There's a couple of lads in Milltown. But it's up to individuals as well to put their hands up and take the opportunity of the club championship to force themselves onto at least a conversation to be in the mix for a Galway panel, and give Porrig and the management team a headache. But no, I don't think they've missed anybody in the last year or two anyway.
The way I look at it nearly is it's the likes of your Keane Hernans now, Daniel O'Flaherty's, Carl Sweeney's, even Jack O'Neill, Sam O'Neill. Those players around their age now. It's up to them to drive it now for the next few years.
Absolutely, and this is where the league now becomes really important. As I said, there's probably two or three lads there that really don't need to prove anything in the league, Paul included. And it's time to see now, will these guys actually stand up and at least force a conversation. As I said, Porrig and the management have been good enough to have these guys in around the league for the last year or two, and that's really stood to them. I'm really excited too about particularly Jack and Sam. I know they can offer a lot, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them develop as footballers. Again, right across the team, and I have to mention as well, every single player on that team, they're very humble. They're great with their time. And that's something that, again, a lot of players don't get great credit for. But they're great ambassadors for their county, and they're great ambassadors for football as well, which is paramount as well. Particularly, again, when you go back to the dreams that they're painting for these younger players and juveniles coming up.
A question that's actually come in from a listener. The treatment of Sam O'Neill harsh. Do you think it was harsh throughout the year?
Yeah, look, the guy he kicked a great score. This is the game against Derry.
Yeah,
Look, I don't know what the conversation was before or after. Look, again, I worked with Sam. He's a model footballer. Look, that's elite sport. You know, I don't think Pádraig went out or the management team went out with the intention of giving him 15, 16 minutes and whipping him off. He did very little wrong. Personally, I couldn't see why he couldn't have stayed on a little bit longer, but that's why I'm not the Galway manager and Pádraig Joyce is. But look, it's elite sport, and again, I know Sam well, and I know he would take it in that context as well. He's not one to throw his toys out of the pram. That's the level these guys are competing at, and in fairness, when Keane Darcy came in, he made a big difference. So yeah, I wouldn't get too caught up in it or get too wound up on it. As I said, that's elite level sport, and these guys are well used to that, and that's what the expectation is.
yeah. Even there, when people are talking about new faces, we had Brian Mannion in there, obviously from Trimstairs. He started that game against New York, and I thought actually that day looked really good in patches. You mentioned Jack O'Neill, his first year in there, obviously with Galway, and Sam O'Neill too, building on the club form. You have Patrick Egan too from Kerfin. We didn't see a lot of them this year. Did struggle with injuries throughout the year. And then Tom O'Callaghan got himself back from injury there. Colin Costello in from the 20s this year, and even Shane McGlinchey, I know struggled with injury, and he's working his way back now to fitness. But like these these are players who are serving their apprenticeships with Galway for a year or two, well, and we've seen that with like Johnny McGrath, Sean Fitzgerald, these players in the past, how their apprenticeships has actually benefited them.
Absolutely, and I touched on it earlier. I think it's a great bit of foresight by the management team, and it shows great confidence in these lads. And you mentioned Shay McGlinchey there and the young Costello lad. This is a huge step up for them, and that step up now has been made that little bit easier because they're in and around the environment. And this is where the likes of Paul and the likes of Damien Comer and Shane and the more experienced lads to be exposed to these guys. And even with Shay with his injury, which is a very serious injury for a young lad like that, just on the cusp of it. But I'm sure when he's talking to the likes of Damien, who can give him a list of injuries and how he's dealt with it, as I said, mentally that's a huge challenge, and that's where these guys will only benefit. And again, just looking at the likes of Sam and Jack, and they've become really strong athletes. We know they have football, but they've been turned into big athletic men. And again, that's another thing from being in and around, uh, which is going to be a huge benefit to James's this year, please God. So, I do think that's a huge investment. And again, it shows, as I said earlier, it shows great confidence in these young lads. And that augurs well.
Just finally on the, I suppose, footballers whole as a season, Barry, before we touch on a couple of club bits, maybe new phases who can put their hands up. Overall, how do Galway pick it up for the 2026 season? Because it's disappointment last year losing the final, and people see it this year as it's nearly two steps back losing at a quarter final stage. But how do Galway pick it up? Because this is definitely probably a big setback in their plans.
It is. And look, you again, it goes back to the desire and the belief. Um, there's definitely something there. As I said, I think everybody just getting used to and getting a feeling for the new rules. I do think, as I said, it's a huge learning particularly for that back 6 or 8 for Galway. Um, uh, I suppose this is where now Pádraig and his management team, if they are, please God, to continue, this is where they earn their crust now, is to paint that picture and show the progress that's been made. It's the small margins. Who's to know if they'd got over Meath, would they've got over Donegal? that's where, as I said, the dreams start becoming reality. It's starting from scratch again. But I think it's a really important league next year for Galway. As I said, if we can unearth one or two more players to push that a little bit further, some of the lads we mentioned there. So I think it'll be a really, really important league, and that should set the tone and the standard. And we'll see how much desire there is there to get one or two lads just to really push on from this year, including Matthew Thompson. Like we saw him really just let go this year. There'll be all eyes on him now next year, please God. And as I said, I'm for one, I'm excited to see him now in club championship and going into the league, please God.
Are there any new faces that aren't in it? Because it's a question that's come in from listeners. What new faces do you think could put their hands up throughout the club championship that aren't involved? Is there anyone for you standing out now that you feel could prove something in the club championship?
Yeah, I was watching a few, it was only league games obviously up to now, and that's where, as I said, I was really looking forward to the championship starting in 3 or 4 weeks' time. Look, I suppose outside of the guys that are in there, excuse me, there's not a whole lot that you could say would really put their hand up. And you look at, say, the top teams in Division 1, Tuam, Corofin, outside of the guys that are already in there, is there anybody there? There's probably not at the moment. But certainly I think once round 2 or 3 of the championship, I would expect to see maybe 2 or 3 lads hopefully put their hand up. What I'd like to see come through, and whether it happens or not, is a dog. I think Galway need a dog.
Yeah.
That type of player that you can just use to put on somebody and just dog them, really. And I don't think there's many counties have those now. I think, and look, obviously a part of the academy system now. I think we coach dogs. We coach the dog out of players now. But I think that's what Galway probably need to find certainly from a defensive point of view, is a dog. And I mean that in a nice way.
Yeah.
I think every team needs one of them. I don't think Galway have one at the moment.
Yeah. For me, like if you're looking to bring anyone in, I think the Monaghan's from out there, they've always had good season for them. Maybe there's someone to look at again there. And I seen him in 1 or 2 club league games. Warren Shoga, I think he's a terrific footballer and something to offer. And like they were only on that under-20s teams a couple of years ago that won the All Ireland in 2020. So maybe they're players to look at again, because they're definitely not players that should be forgotten about. They're only around the 24, 25 age category, and they've all been through the system too, so they have put the work in. It's not like players who haven't played at intercounty level at all.
Yeah, no, that's true. And as you mentioned it too, I think there's a couple of lads in Killannon as well. I think they won in under 20s, or is it 20s or 19s? It is now 20s. I think 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was 2 or 3 names now I've gone out of my head, but they certainly had 2. There was one lad in the middle of the field.
Brian Roach, was it?
Yes, good
Yeah.
man. Yeah. Again, you would expect those lads now from, that was 20s 2 years ago, was it, Paul?
Yeah, would have been 2
Yeah.
years ago at this stage
You'd
now, yeah.
expect those lads now to be stepping up and pushing as well. And I know Killannon have a tricky group as well. So, but yeah, no, it will be interesting to see the club championship now and how that develops, and how lads hopefully push on.
Just with it there, Barry, because you've obviously been involved in the underage system of going out for quite a few years. Why is it then that you feel we're struggling at minor and 20 so much over the last few years?
It's a great question, and I suppose there's no easy answer to it. Look, I have my own view on it too. Obviously you want to win. The way I'd probably look at it objectively, though, is from a minor point of view, you want to probably put between 6 and 8 lads into a 20 setup or a panel. And then the ultimate job for a 20s coach, obviously you want to win, does it? Don't get me wrong. But again, the ultimate part is to provide between probably 3 and 5 players to a senior level. If you look at, and people dissed Leinster football for many years, but if you look at the way Meath have progressed, yes, they won a minor All-Ireland, but they contested Leinster finals. They didn't win them, but they produced players to each level, if you get me. And I think we lose that focus. And I think Alan Flynn touched on your show last week. A senior manager is only reliant of what's coming in the 20s and obviously a minor. But having worked with 14s now for the last 4 to 5 years, we're now starting to see them come to minor and beyond. And I think, what do we want from that? Do we want to win in All Ireland, or do we want to develop footballers to go to the next level? And it's probably a little bit of both. It's a balancing act, because you have to keep people happy that want to win. For me, under 20 is under 20. It's still a development team. And if a manager can provide 5 players to a senior manager, I think he's done his job.
Yeah, and I even think with it too, like a couple of these 20s, just because they had a bad year, shouldn't be forgotten about either when it comes to the club championship. Because even Sean Dunn, I thought had a good year for the 20s. Éanna Monaghan's now going to be with Clare Galway. Mikey Mulryan, good season for Caltra. Kieran Mulhern, a couple of these players, like there's definitely enough quality there. Even looking at Jack Lonergan with Clare Galway, Mark Bennion, another year with Saltill, like there's still plenty of quality from that 20s team.
And that's the thing. And look, you can be lucky sometimes and get a crop. Won't mention the year, but there was 1 or 2 very flat years there even with the 14s. And look, that's not to say that when they get to minor they'll be different, but you can get a certain crop at a certain time. And no disrespect to any of those teams or their management teams, but you can only work with what you have. But that doesn't mean that those, as you said, those individuals aren't quality footballers are going to make it. They just didn't have maybe the bodies around them to help them push on. But they're still individually great football. And as I'm saying, if the 20s manager can provide 5 players to your senior panel, that's for me, that's job done. Again, that's about.
I think the only thing from a supporter point of view, we don't want to see Galway continuously competing at the B grade in minor in 20s, really.
No, and look, they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But and that's, as I said, that's the part that everybody looks at. And I suppose, look, this year was a disappointing year I know the people involved were probably more disappointed than anybody. But as I said, you're to go back to your original question, what's happening? Look, I suppose it's like everything else. You can only try, you can only select, you can only pick. In fairness, the amount of time and effort that's going into it is second to none. The development programs that are being made for these young lads now, the work that Satan to do, the monitoring these players from basically under 14 upwards is first class. The support that they get, both from, as I said, athletically, but from diet, nutrition, every aspect of it. And the amount of work that's been done is first class, to be fair. And as I said, that will pay dividend. How soon, we don't know, but it has to come good at some stage.
Just then, Barry, for to touch on a couple of the club bits, we obviously had league finals over the weekend. I think there was big relief in Tuam, to be honest. I know it's only the league and everything, but like there's been heartbreak with Kerfin in league finals over the last few years. I might remember one year penalty shootout, and in fairness, I wasn't at the game now myself, but even from chatting to a few that were at it, a good few people did say Tuam probably made this harder on themselves than it needed to be. Like they were cruising at one stage, and then Kerfin came back like they always do, but they won out in the end, 112 to 13 points. And I think this is big for Tuam to get a trophy under Dave Donlan too, because they've been making a lot of progress.
Oh, definitely. And look, they've been very consistent for the last number of years, to be fair. And like you've said, it was very important that they won it. And yeah, I think at one stage they could have gone 10 up,
Yeah.
missed an opportunity. Then I think Corfin got 6 or 7 scores on the trot. But look, at the same time, you got to give credit. People will say, oh, well, they nearly kicked it away or threw it away, but they held out. And I think in the end it was probably nicer to win by 2 points than it was 10, because again it showed a great bit of character that they did hold out. And you're right. I think it was probably more important for Tuam than Corofin, and no disrespect, but they did get that kind of monkey off the back. I know they met them in championship. Was it last year? Again, they had the winning of it. They didn't. And a bit like our neighbours, we were good enough to win, but we didn't. Which was always the Mayo way of analysing games, where Tuam actually did win it this time. So again, that's a nice way to go into championship. And you're right, it gives great belief then. And in fairness, I know Corofin were missing players, but Tuam were missing 5 or 6 lads as well.
Yeah.
So
But in
yeah,
fairness, both teams down a lot of players. I think big thing for Tuam though is like last year, Jack Rugan was racing to get fit. All season he's at full fitness now. He's played football for Armagh, so big positive there. And even I know they've Mark Colleran back, who was injured last year, and as well with that Chase obviously racing now to get back as well. But he's expected to be back at some stage throughout the championship. So there is big positives there when you look at it for Tuam. I think they
there is. Yeah, and look, was it a semi-final last year, which
yeah.
arguably
And
they believe they could have and should have
yeah,
won. But yeah, no, there's definitely they're on the right road. And the likes of Luke Davin and these guys now are really standing up and becoming top players in their own right as well. Which is great to see. So it's not the old reliables that Tuam would have had down the years. Obviously Jamie Murphy is still there and he's pulling a few strings, but the pressure's off the likes of him now with Grug and others there stepping up, and no more than Damien. It's the attention that he takes which frees up the likes of Luke and others to pitch in with scores. And then obviously you have Brian Mannion, who's a match winner on any day.
yeah. And with that, safe to say, Griffin down a lot of bodies too. Not going anywhere. Obviously, change of management there. Gary Delaney in there this year, with Jerry McGowan as his coach, and just obviously like Griffin, they're still favourites for the championship. They can't not be favourites for the championship at this stage.
No, definitely. And look, I think Gary brings a huge amount of professionalism as well. I think it's well known the kind of thing he built with Dunmore, and okay, they were successful with Alan Glynn this year, but a lot of that was built on what Gary did. And yeah, there's going to be a different animal. Will Gary Sice stick around, or will he play a part this year? Will be interesting. But no, I think they'll be obviously anybody who beats them will have a good chance of claiming glory this year.
In the Division Two final, Mike Cullen 213, Lettermore 1-8. This is impressive for Mike Cullen, like down a lot of bodies this year. Sean Kelly obviously gone out to play with Connemara Gales for a bit of the summer, so obviously down him and a good few more bodies too. Phil McDonough really seemed to be one of the stars of the show in this Division Two league final. You were only mentioning off air as well. Lettermore gone from Division Three to One in the space of 2 years, which is a remarkable achievement. But um, a big result for Mike Holland too. And for them, I know they
That
wanted to get
is,
up to one as well.
but a lot of the players that were playing that day won a minor about 4 or 5 years ago, I think.
Mm.
And as I said, that's been that group of players have been pushing. And I suppose this is the challenge that they have when the other boys come back, and keeping everybody happy, because in fairness to these young lads, they've definitely stepped up this year. And that final, I wasn't at it, but that scoreline surprised me, because as I said, I've been a big fan of Lettermore the last couple of years, because they've effectively got 2 or 3 promotions in a row now, and now they're finding themselves in Division One. And I don't know what group. I think they're in Corofin's group for championship, but they
Yeah,
they they'll take beating too. They're well organised, well structured, and they can hurt you.
yeah, no, it's for sure. Would you go by Mike Holland at second still in the county title?
Um, I know they let me down last year, but I would probably go Salt Hill second.
I'll tell you're
Yeah,
expecting the one.
yeah,
I think in fairness, a lot of people did tip them up high last year and were
yeah.
disappointed really when it came away with that performance in the semi final last year.
it was freaky, and they really disappointed me. Because again, as I said, I was excited. And from when I was involved with the lads with James's, they were one team we wanted to try and avoid the most because of all the options they had, and as you said, to be that flat and that disappointing in the end, um, which hopefully, and from their point of view, I'm sure is a big motivator for this year. But looking at Galway's top performers, and we neglected to talk about John Maher earlier as well. You know, great man for pulling strings, great worker. So they have quality on every line, and that's what would probably put them ahead slightly of Mike Cullen for me.
Yeah, it is. It does seem at the minute like even from looking at the, I suppose, teams, Carfin, Salthill, Mike Cullen, Tuam, it does seem that they're in their category of four at the minute. And then there's a pack.
There is, and there's a good pack. As I said, obviously I'd be very biased towards the lads in James's, and I think I think they've 7 or 8 bodies to come back into their team. I know Killannon are in the same group, but I know they'll be expecting to push on from last year. They had a great year last year. I think they only lost narrowly to Corofin in the quarter final. So there'll be a couple of teams there pushing, and there will obviously be a surprise or two. And I think on a given day, that's why, as I said, I love the way the Galway Championship is set up now, Paul, with the winners playing the winners. It means your third game is really important as well. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it. But yeah, outside of those four, as I said, I'd be biased and put James is in there close to it, Killannon. But there will be a surprise or two.
Yeah, I know James is down a good couple of bodies there now over the weekend against Dunmore, losing 2-7 to 121. But Dunmore, similar to Leshermore, went up 2 divisions now and in the space of 2 years. And in fairness, 121 is a fair score to be racking up.
Absolutely, and I think there's more in them as well. And again, you talk about new rules. They're one team. The way they play, the movement they have, the lads up front they have. They're one team. I think that will could be one of the ones to cause upsets as well. Am I right in saying they're in the group with Tuam and Clare Galway? I think.
Boom, Clare Galway and a down
Yeah,
Dunmore.
yeah,
Probably at the minute, I feel that's probably the group of death.
yeah, definitely. Personally, though, I think Clare Galway probably have stepped back a little bit.
Yeah,
I know
obviously
they're
change of
missing
management
bodies as
there
well.
now.
Yeah, I think they'll be. I don't think they'll be a huge force. And a down again, depending on fitness of Damien and if Frankie Burke comes back for a 50th year.
Yeah,
Um,
he's back all right. I think concerned that.
yeah, as I said, I expect Tuam and Dunmore to come out of that group, but it will be an interesting one.
Yeah, even looking down at the other finals over the weekend, Brendan's were crowned 3B champions. They beat Caltra and then Kilkerran Clonberne beat Carnacashel in the 4A final. So that brings an end to the league finals now. As we mentioned, championship getting underway at the start of August. So Barry, if I had to push you, who's your winners of senior this year?
Um, yeah, I'm going to stick the neck out and go with Salthill at this stage.
And why?
Just purely on the back, as I said, I think potentially they have quality on every line. Um, uh, and I do expect them to hurt from last year, particularly in the way they went out. Um, and I would put Tuam in second. I would put Tuam in second. I know we spoke about the qualities of Corofin and particularly with Gary going in as well. But I think that league final win will give them a huge boost. And as I said, they still have bodies. Everybody's talking about Corofin's bodies to come back, but Tuam have lads to come back as well. But yeah, I just think for the quality and I think Salthill are the team to beat.
And just intermediate winners for you, Barry?
I always said that's a tougher competition to win than senior. You know, yeah. Even though they lost last year, I thought Caltra were probably the best team in the competition. I thought they probably should have won on both occasions against Michael. I know they didn't, but yeah, I would like, and again, I have a lot of good friends out in Caltra, but I would probably, if I was to pick one at this stage, it would probably be Caltra.
You just see them coming back even from losing the final last year, yeah?
Yeah, I do. And as I said, I think that experience could stand to them. Whether it does or not now is another thing. It can. It's a hard, no more than Galway. It's a hard mountain to climb again. But I just thought they were, everybody they played up to the final, they managed really, really well, and they won most games comfortably. I know they played, I think it was Glenamaddy in the semi-final, and I think Glenamaddy got a couple of early goals, but they were by far the better team. So I think arguably they were, if not the first, they were definitely the second best team in that championship last year, and I expect them to match that again this year.
Yeah, in fairness, I think a lot of people would probably agree with you there that you'd expect them to get back to the latter stages again, particularly with the age profile even of that Calgary team too. But that's all we do have time for on this evening's show. As I mentioned from the outset, we'll be building up to the club championship over the next few weeks with preview shows and interviews even from some players from the clubs, hopefully, as well as the power rankings as well. It'll be back soon over the next few weeks. But that's all we do have time for on this evening's show. Thanks a million to Barry Downey for coming on.
Great. Thanks, Hat.